Happy Monday, Dog Nation. This is DawgNation Daily, a daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And I am Brandon Adams, and I'm very glad to have you with us for what we're going to do today. It is John Stinchcomb coming up in a couple of minutes. Also, a lot of look around the world of college football recruiting in the weekend, both what happened at Georgia and Georgia targets who were elsewhere and some of the big things that are being said. We will try to separate fact from fiction on all of that. And, of course, we'll also walk through the twists and turns of the Brandon Turnage saga. You know Turnage as the former Alabama defensive back who announced his transfer to Georgia, but now his status as a Georgia Bulldog is seemingly up in the air. We will tell you all about that, what we know, what has been speculated on, and everything else here over the course of the next few minutes as well. So it is a busy show. We're glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is a lot to say about the situation involving former Alabama defensive back, at one point in time a guy we thought was going to be a Georgia Bulldog, Brandon Turnage. Now we're not quite sure where all of that stands. A lot to say about that situation. We will do that in a few minutes' time. Before that, though, I want to begin with UGA recruiting talk and what a weekend it was for Georgia as it hosted a bunch of big-name visitors and really had a chance to make a big impression on some of the big names for the class of 2022, and it certainly seems like this was a nice step forward for UGA. And yes, I say all of this understanding that every visit seemingly goes well. Every big-time player who takes a look at a big-time program before the pandemic, after the pandemic, whatever else, things aren't really different. It's always going to be a great time. And yet I think if you're a Georgia fan, you still take some pride in knowing that UGA seems to do this thing well. Get a bunch of guys together, make all of them feel loved and welcomed, really rolling out the red carpet, putting the best foot forward for Athens and the university and the program itself. I've heard from some folks that had a chance to be a kind of part of all of that, both on the athletic side, the academic side, and all the ways in which Georgia wants to say, hey, take a look at what we have going on here. So even if you expect the visits to go well, it is still, I would say, a really nice thing that the visits themselves do go well. Now, I want to read you one sentence here real quick from Jeff Sintel at DawgNation.com. This is from yesterday, and I think it kind of sets us up where we want to go here for a couple of minutes. He says that things went really, really well. He says it looks like Kojo Antwi, of course, that's the receiver out of Lambert High School, and Oscar Delp, the tight end out of West Forsyth High School. It sounds like they really want to play well. They really want to play together. Jeff also writes that if I had to place the two players where it sounds like the dial moved the most for public targets in town this weekend, he says I'd have to go with Antwi and, of course, Branson Robinson, the big-time running back from the state of Mississippi. Robinson's a guy that, of course, we've talked about a lot before. So with that, with Jeff, he also says when it comes to Delp, nothing has changed with his target plan. He's still got a marathon march of schools up ahead and still eyeing a public decision reveal on September 30th. That is his mother's birthday. So from Jeff Sintel's perspective here, great weekend for UGA. Big impact when it comes to Branson Robinson. Another big impact for Oscar Delp. And Jeff says right there, and this certainly perks my attention up, a big impact from Kojo Antwi as well. Big impact on Kojo Antwi and his recruitment. So let's see if we can kind of unpack all of this a little bit here and kind of see where things stand. If Jeff wants to say that Georgia made a nice impression on Robinson here this week, the running back out of Mississippi, Robinson's own words would seem to back that up. There was a great tweet from Branson that I want to make sure that I show you. A nice collection of photos from his own visit there to a UGA. Branson celebrating the fact that dreams, he says, become reality. And he says three words here that are going to carry a lot of weight. That Georgia was amazing. And I think that's great to hear because it certainly seems like this is the kind of furtherance of what has been a very impressive series of efforts in recruiting by Georgia to Branson Robinson that's certainly gotten a lot of attention. In fact, Robinson is a little bit different than some of the recruits that sometimes we might talk about here who want to keep things a secret and want to not make too much known about how they're feeling about any certain facet of their recruitment. In Robinson's case, that's never really quite been his issue there. Says, listen, I thought Georgia was amazing, and that comes on the heels of him being very clear with our Jeff Sintel in the past about exactly where Georgia ranks in his recruitment. Let me give you a reminder of that from an interview that Robinson did with Jeff not all that long ago.
It's no secret now. It's #1 right now. But, I just want to get the feel for everything. I just want to go down there, see how everything is, because, I just don't want to, if I commit there, I just don't want to be there the first time I go down there after I commit. I want to see how everything is, and that's all that is.
So let's do the math in our head on this just for a little bit. Branson Robinson says, it's no secret that Georgia's my leader, but I want to visit Georgia and make sure that when I put feet on the ground there in Athens, that the vibe I get matches with the feeling that I have about them right now. And he just tweeted out, Georgia was amazing. So I'm going to do a little 2 + 2 in my head and say, well, if Georgia was your leader before, but you say, listen, I still got to visit the school, make sure that I got to kick the tires in person, and then you're saying, hey, the visit was amazing. Well, I'm going to add that up together in my head. I'm going to be left to conclude, wow, Georgia must be in a pretty good spot with Branson Robinson. And he's got every right not to make a decision now, take more visits, and go through his process. In fact, I would encourage him to do that. Make sure you're making the best decision for you, even if that leads you to visit some other places besides UGA. But if Jeff wants to say that this is a big weekend for Georgia when it comes to Branson Robinson, that's on top of what it has already been up to this point in time, by anybody's estimation, a successful recruitment for Georgia when it comes to Robinson there, and that's really fun. Something else that was really fun, when it was the Barstool UGA account that shared this photo, but I want to give this to you, of a lot of the recruits, Robinson included, Oscar Delp, who we mentioned a moment ago, Gunnar Stockton, of course, the 2022 quarterback commit. They're all gathered here at Sanford Stadium. The lights are off, but the red LED lights are shining. I love this photo, and I apologize if you're watching radio podcast, you can't see this, but we'll put a link to this when we post the show later on so you can see this for yourself. I love this photo so much of Smart with the recruits, and he's kind of in the middle there. He's got the open collar shirt, the sport coat, and he's pointing at the camera. I'm going to date myself a little bit with this reference, but for those of you who are kind of like children of the 80s like me, you may know what I'm talking about here. How much does Kirby Smart in this picture look like J.J. Dillon, the former manager of the Four Horsemen? And I realize this is more than 4 recruits standing around him, but with those guys all kind of posing, giving you a little bit of a mean mug to the camera, and Kirby kind of in the middle there, sport coat, open collar, pointing at the camera, taking the photo. He looks just like J.J. Dillon, the heel manager for this faction of wrestlers. I think this is a great photo. It's Sanford Stadium in its best light, obviously looking really cool, all lit up in red. Obviously a lot of recruits, some of the ones we just mentioned a moment ago, kind of having some fun there as well. And once again, this seems to be a furtherance of what has been some really good recruiting for UGA, because one of the guys in that photo, of course, is Oscar Delp, the tight end from West Forsyth. And this, for Delp, much like for Robinson, who we said a moment ago, has a nice visit on the heels of what's already been a growing relationship with Georgia. It seems like Delp has a really nice visit on the heels, by the way, of being in Alabama not too long ago, has a really nice visit to UGA here on the heels of what has already been a really strengthening bond between not just he and Georgia, but his family in UGA as well. Once again, a reminder from Oscar Delp.
He's been very consistent. We talk almost every day. We text every day, call every other day. I mean, we're always talking on the phone. The Georgia coaches have definitely won my parents over, or definitely my mom. I mean, she got, I think, 15 cards on Mother's Day from all of them, and she loved all that. That's going to be a big thing with the recruiting process, I think. With my parents, they're definitely going to be a big influence in my decision. I'm going to make it in the end, but I mean, I'm going to listen to them a lot. But I mean, they like Georgia a lot right now, just from the connections that they have with the coaches. I mean, my mom's like, I don't want to send my baby off to some random, doesn't know the coach that well. I mean, they've definitely won my mom over, I'll say that.
The he there at the beginning of that comment from Oscar Delp was Todd Hartley, the tight ends coach, who's led the way in Hartley and Delp's recruitment. But you listen to the way that he describes the relationship that his family has with UGA, the way that UGA has kind of won over his mom, and now you have a nice visit on top of that. Once again, much the same way you kind of feel fairly confident and at least optimistic about Georgia and Robinson. I think you're left to feel the same way about Delp there as well. It is interesting to hear Jeff say that Georgia may have made some similar type moves with Coach Joanne Twee this weekend. I will admit this, and this is just because I'm I don't know. You can call me pessimistic or whatever else you want to call me. But as someone who obviously loved to see Antwi there at University of Georgia as a part of this 2022 class, I'd love to see some of these similar public declarations for Antwi. It seems like Antwi's one of these guys who, he's had a good visit to Alabama recently. At one point in time, he was kind of linked to Ohio State. He's been obviously linked to Texas A&M. He's got some family ties there to the state of Texas. It'd be nice, I think, for a lot of Georgia fans to hear some of the public proclamations from Antwi that you've heard from guys like Delp and Robinson and, some of these other names who seem to be growing closer to Georgia by the day. Sounds like Jeff says behind the scenes, some of that may have gone on with Antwi this weekend. I think a lot of folks will be watching to see how much of that kind of becomes public as we kind of continue through this 2022 cycle where the Antwi recruitment would seem to be incredibly contested. And I would also remind folks that when Jeff Sentell was on with us on Friday here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, we did talk a lot about Antwi during that interview. So if you missed Friday's show, maybe go back and check in on all of that. So let me kind of sum all of this up and try to kind of wrap all this up in kind of a neat package here. There is no doubt that the opening of visits again, the ending of the dead period, has come at a good time for UGA, as it is furthering relationships that are already strong with top recruits, kind of growing relationships, in some cases out of nowhere, with guys that we haven't even had a lot of public conversation about, but it seems like Georgia made some inroads there. You expect visits to go well, but these, for Georgia, went maybe even better than could be expected. This was a seemingly big weekend for UGA recruiting. Nice groundwork laid for what's going to be another elite class for 2022, if not the very best in the country. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and glad to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, radio at noon, normally on Athens Sports Radio, the 960 The Ref. We're actually going to be back, I think, on 960 again tomorrow. They've had a couple things going on here, so we're looking forward to being back on the radio in Athens again tomorrow. For those of you who normally listen to us on the radio and kind of gravitated towards us on another platform, we certainly appreciate you being here, and we'll look forward to being back with you on the radio there with our friends in the Classic City again very soon here this week. And, of course, podcast platforms, all of them, Apple, the Google platforms, the Spotify, SoundCloud, worldfamousdognation.com, however you find us. We're just really glad you made this show a part of your daily routine. And a big thanks to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making it all possible. We would not have the studio, wouldn't have a producer to help me out, would not have access to all these platforms if it wasn't for the great work the folks at Pella do to make this show available to you here today. So a big thanks to them, and a big reminder that not only are they great partners for us here at DawgNation Daily, but they're also tremendous partners for you as well when it comes to equipping your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. Let's face it, better windows and doors can do a lot of things for you. Make your house feel better on the inside, keep the stuff that's outside where it's supposed to be on the outside. And by the way, it looks better on the outside as well. Improved curb appeal is a big part of this too. So the folks at Pella want to set all you up with kind of a very easy, no hassle, no pressure consultation to walk you through all the installation options, all of the different choices available to you. This is the kind of thing they're famous for, because while Pella is a nationally known company with kind of unparalleled resources, it's also a locally owned branch right here in Georgia. That means you get family service as well. So you get kind of the best of both worlds when it comes to Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Also a great offer for you right now. You can currently get 10% off your entire project or 0% APR for 24 months. So great savings there. Couple of ways to get in touch. Let me give you the phone number first. It's 678-638-1496. Once again, that's 678-638-1496, or online, pellaofga.com/DawgNation. One more time for that website, pellaofga.com/DawgNation. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. All right, it's John Stinchcomb here coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse, assisted today by our friends at AAA. And I do want to get into now the story that kind of dominated the news last night and kind of wild twists and turns on a lot of this. There were some reports, including our buddy Mike Griffith from DawgNation.com, who said that Brandon Turnage had left the Georgia program, that I guess he'd been to Athens. Obviously, classes haven't started yet, but he had come to Athens, shown up, but then decided to leave the Georgia program. There was some belief this may be related to the arrival of Darian Kendrick, the cornerback transfer from Clemson, or whatever else. But it was reported that Brandon Turnage was no longer with the Georgia team. Now, as many of you are aware, Turnage last night on Twitter responded to all of this in his own social media message saying, kind of relax with the rumors. Seemingly, in this case, Turnage pushing back on the idea that it was true that he was no longer with the Georgia team, saying, as of right now, these are rumors, and as he says, rumors that folks should kind of relax with a little bit. To kind of further complicate this, though, certainly there would seem to be something more than just a rumor to the idea that Turnage is either on his way out or considering being on his way out, because there was also last night around 8:30 p.m., I think this became available online, Georgia extending another scholarship offer to another transfer defensive back, a guy from Tulsa. We'll show this to you. Caleb Evans is his name, who said, I was blessed and grateful to receive an offer from the University of Georgia, and gives you a hashtag Go Dogs with all of that. So a lot going on here in terms of the reports that Turnage had left the team, Turnage kind of pushing back, calling that rumors, Georgia offering another defensive back, which I think most of us would believe that Georgia would not have the scholarship space to do unless Turnage is indeed not coming. Turnage's high school coach also talked to Mark Weiser from the Athens Banner Herald, onlineathens.com. Michael Fair is his name, who says that Turnage is, quote, just kind of going through some things. He just said he didn't feel comfortable at UGA for some reason. So kind of a lot to unpack here, and I guess I'm kind of left with a couple of different thoughts on this. First of all, on this show, we try to be as kind of pro-player as we possibly can be. In other words, we're pretty supportive of players, and we try to be advocates, for the players to play this sport, whether they're guys at Georgia or guys who ultimately end up playing somewhere else. But this is one of those things where I think honesty compels me to admit that if Turnage thought he was coming to Georgia with a starting spot guaranteed at UGA, because, there is, I guess some general belief out there that maybe this is related to, a more challenging access to playing time, given the fact that Kendrick's on his way here and things along those lines. If Turnage thought he was going to get easy access to a starting job at UGA, then he's just got to have a better read on the situation than that. I mean, take Darian Kendrick out of this for a moment, whether he should or shouldn't have known that Georgia had been involved with Darian Kendrick, we'll push that aside. But just along the lines of guys like Jalen Kimber and Keely Ringo, or Amir Speed, someone who's been, a veteran with this program since 2017. The idea that Turnage would be the heir apparent starter at cornerback over guys like that, boy, I don't quite know how you get there, which is not to say that Turnage would not be able to earn that starting job, but that's just that's a lot to expect, given Turnage's background, what he has and hasn't done in Alabama, what his recruiting profile is in comparison to the other guys who are here. I just think as a player, you got to be very, very careful assuming that the grass somewhere else is going to be so much greener that if you haven't been starting at your previous school, you're going to just sort of slide right in and start starting at UGA. That's probably expecting a little too much there. But beyond that, I'd say this when it comes to Georgia fans who kind of watch some of this kind of stuff play out publicly, and to this point in time, I guess we still don't quite really know what Turnage is going to do, although, maybe at this point in time the writing is on the wall that he's on his way out. I think fans themselves have to be really careful about pushing guys on the way out the door through something like this. This whole notion of, well, if he's wavering or if, he doesn't want to compete, whatever else, then Georgia shouldn't want him at all. And I just think you got to be really careful being so quick to condemn somebody in that situation. Frankly, it's the same kind of thing that some Georgia fans would have criticized LSU fans for when it came to a Rick Gilbert. So if you're going to say, well, LSU fans were disloyal to Gilbert before Gilbert left LSU to come to Georgia, then I think you got to be careful not doing the same thing when it comes to what Turnage may or may not be doing right now in his relationship to UGA. And listen, I get turned off by some of this transfer portal stuff. I'm not going to lie to you. The way in which this kind of creates a level of chaos around college football, I've told you before, I don't necessarily think that's good, but I'm not going to blame Turnage for it necessarily. It sounds like he's trying to work through something. It sounds like he's trying to figure out, where his fit is after not playing as much as he wanted to at Alabama. It sounds like he wants to make a good, sensible decision about where he goes next and give himself the best chance to play. I frankly can't be all that mad at him for wanting to do that. As I said before, you got to be careful in assuming it's going to be easy for you wherever you go, and maybe Turnage was guilty of thinking that the situation at Georgia was going to be easier than it actually was, even before Darian Kendrick arrived here. But at the same time, if Turnage were to kind of think better of all this, if cooler heads were to prevail, and if he's welcomed back at UGA and decides to come back, who am I to say that Georgia shouldn't welcome him back right there? This is a pretty talented guy, former top 100 recruit, top 10 defensive back. There was a lot going on that made Turnage an attractive prospect when he was first announced to be transferring here to the University of Georgia. So I would just advise UGA fans, be careful condemning here, because this may be a player, if things work out differently, that you may eventually be glad that you have. So we'll see how that plays out. Could be that he's gone, but we'll obviously follow it and see where it goes. That is Around the Doghouse. It's assisted today by our friends at AAA. Of course, AAA known for legendary roadside assistance. Also, really good discounts. We were on the road a lot for Memorial Day weekend, staying in a bunch of different hotels, and AAA discount came up big for us everywhere we went, so that's always a good thing. But that's not the only kind of savings that AAA provides. In fact, it's not even the biggest savings that AAA probably provides. For those that switch to AAA for their auto insurance, on average, they save $529. So find out what a lot of people have learned, which is that AAA is the name to know when it comes to auto insurance as well. It's AAA.com. That's AAA.com/auto insurance. Switch and save today. I think you'll be glad you did. It's great to have them as a part of Around the Doghouse. Also good to have all of you with us here as well. There is a lot going on around UGA. Let's keep that conversation going. Let's figure it all out. Our great friend John Stinchcomb, the terrific former UGL American, he joins us now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. It's glad to have him. I am glad to have him and all of you with us here today as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So we'll say hello to John Stinchcomb, and it's great to have him with us. It's been a while since we talked to John. We were preempted last week not preempted. We just took the day off for the Memorial Day holiday observance. So we missed John last week, but fun to get a chance to talk to him here today. And John, I'll say good morning to you and bring you in on this Brandon Turnage conversation. As I said to our audience before, on the one hand, Turnage made a mistake if he thought he was going to slide in at Georgia and just be immediately inserted as a starter. This program is too deep for anybody to be able to do that, and that's prior to Darian Kendrick from Clemson announcing he was coming in there as well. So, that may be a mistake on his part. But, John, I also think it's a mistake on Georgia fans' part if they're quick to condemn him because he's trying to figure out what he wants to do. Now, maybe he ultimately decides not to be at UGA, and if he doesn't, I guess that's all fine and well too. But if through all of this, if he were to, decide he wants to come back to UGA and be a part of what's going on here, who am I to say that it's a mistake for Georgia to welcome him back after all of this? What do you make of the Turnage situation and kind of where things might stand on that?
Well, I think it would demand a number of assumptions for us to point to a specific reason until we know better. I mean, who knows what's going on behind the scenes? It's right now. There's such speculation as to what's happening and the reason behind it. And that's the era we're in, right, where breaking news becomes talking points, and we're not exactly sure what we are talking about. I don't know exactly what the Turnage situation is and reasons behind it and why the speculation has arisen because it's such an emerging topic. And I'm not going to speak on the reasons why this situation exists because I'm not educated on it. I don't know what's going on with Turnage. I don't know what all the situation is that has caused this to become an issue, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And I guess more broadly speaking, when it comes to a lot of transfers right now are trying to consider where their new college home is supposed to be, I guess, John, the one piece of advice I would offer is just be careful assuming that anything's going to be easy. And I think that's one of the real potential downfalls of this kind of portal age in which we live is that the portal has kind of been sold to players as a magic carpet ride, right? It's like a magic wand you can wave and leave a tough situation and go to an easier situation. But at big-time college football, John, everything is tough. Everything is challenging. Everybody on every one of these teams, the kinds of teams that we talk about on a show like this, everybody was high school All-American and big-time prospect. And, the idea that you're going to just easily push anybody aside and waltz your way to a starting job, take it beyond Turnage and just make it more broadly speaking for all of these potential transfers, it's not going to be easy wherever you go. And I do think it's important to keep reminding players of that the portal is sometimes not exactly what it's been sold to you as being.
Absolutely. Now, I think that's a fair discussion point for all of us to kind of look at and analyze because, we've seen in the past players that discourage. I'm thinking about Brett Martell, really. If you look at the Ohio State situation where he's offering cautionary tales to Justin Fields,
Sure,
and then transfers himself trying to get a better situation, and it didn't turn out that way. The bird in the hand. Sometimes you look at it and you say, "Golly, this isn't the situation I want to be in," because it's not apparent to you today. I think you have to have some sort of perseverance and perception that no matter where you're going, no matter what your situation is, it demands some work. And just because this new opportunity that exists in college athletics of this transfer portal, it does not mean that you don't have to work anymore. I mean, no matter what the situation is, if you're at a school, you no longer like it, you don't like the opportunities that present themselves right now, it doesn't mean you get to go to the next place and you're not going to have to work. That doesn't change. So for some of these guys, I think they're seeing this portal for what it is, which is an opportunity to kind of change your predicament, and with the understanding that you still have to work at your craft, you still have to maximize the opportunity that you think you're walking into. And then for other guys, I don't think they're recognizing the fact that just because you can move on or move to a different school, it doesn't change the fact that you have to work still. I mean, just because it hadn't worked out for you in the past and you've got this new door, it's not always the best choice to walk through it.
No, I think that may be fair. It also occurs to me that as we're talking about this transfer situation and what we do and don't know about it does occur to me that we haven't had a chance to hear from you about the transfers that Georgia added last week. Darian Kendrick, former All-ACC defensive back from Clemson. Rick Gilbert, one of the top freshmen in the SEC a year ago. These, to me, would seem like big-time ads and certainly a little bit more certainty to these discussions of both Gilbert and Kendrick on their way to UGA, and hard to see how this isn't very big for the program, right?
Yes, and this is the positive side of the transfer portal. It's something that everyone is learning. What is this? What does it mean to college sports? What can this do for my team, both positively and negatively? Because there's going to be impacts felt in both ways. But to be able to add in June 2 players that very realistically could be huge for this Georgia team, only 2 months away from the start of the season, you can't be anything other than super excited to add the talent that Georgia was able to add. This is totally new territory, but to get the likes of Rick Gilbert and Kendrick from Clemson. Sorry, I'm distracted. Folks are yelling around here. I'm actually in the west end zone right now.
Oh, is that right?
For an athletic medical review board. So they got all sorts of stuff going on around here. It's good to be in the stadium because it's beautiful, but there's always something going on around here.
Well, we won't take too much more. Go ahead.
No, this is good stuff, but just to be able to add this level of talent is huge to address a position of need that I think there was some serious concern for legitimate reasons, just because of the amount of talent you're replacing in the secondary, and through the transfer portal to be able to add so many key pieces, obviously bolsters a position of need. And then with the injuries of George Pickens, you're questioning who's that number 1 receiver. Now, granted, Georgia's got more positional depth than I think history would prove. This might be the deepest wide receiver room that Georgia had to be able to absorb a loss, which, you're never going to fully be able to replace that, a loss of a guy like George Pickens. But I think you were in a position to rally about as well as we ever could have, just because of the number of guys in the room. But to be able to add such a huge talent in Gilbert, I mean, it's huge.
I
big
think
stuff.
I think it is, and I certainly appreciate you being with us. I don't want to take up too much more of your time because it sounds like you got a great event going on. I do want to get a couple things from you, though, here. You mentioned being in the West End Zone. That's obviously one of those, great facilities that's enhanced UGA's recruiting effort. We saw Sanford Stadium on big display this weekend with recruits like, Gunnar Stockton was in town, and Oscar Delp, who was in town, and Kojo Antwi, who was in town, and, Branson Robinson, on and on you could go. There's obviously a brand new football facility that recruits and players themselves have kind of raved about. When you see the Georgia machine operating the way that it did this past weekend, John, and the way that it has since June 1st, when the NCAA mandated debt period was lifted, as an alumnus of this program and a guy who's still a stakeholder in everything that goes on at UGA, I got to imagine that fills you with a pretty strong sense of pride to know that things are kind of working the way they're supposed to be working.
Well, I think it's timed up really well for Georgia because having walked through the new Budsmere additions, they are outstanding. I mean, jaw-droppingly nice. I've been to some of this world's best hotels, and their appointments aren't on the level of what these players are going to be able to experience. So to have recruits come in and see these updated facilities that are on par with the best in the country, if not unmatched across this country, is going to be a huge addition and recruiting tool that Coach Smart and his staff are going to utilize for a long time to come. It is really something to see, and I'm telling you, I just walking through, and I'm in the shower going, the shower is impressive. So the attention to detail that they put in these facilities is something that's remarkable, and all Georgia fans will be super excited once they get to see more cuts and clips from access that as these spaces get utilized. But now that we've opened back up to recruiting and it feels like there's a sense of normalcy, there's so much to be excited about as a Georgia fan, and having those big names and future recruits and hopefully future Bulldogs on campus is a great return to this part of the season that so many folks get excited about.
I want to finish with this, if you don't mind, something else we haven't had a chance to hear from you on. You're obviously a part of the UGA Athletic Association a board there, and the meeting takes place a couple of weeks ago. There was some big news that kind of came out of that, whether it be full capacity for games this fall, something that was not necessarily unexpected, but still welcome news nonetheless, that you're going to have 93K back in Sanford Stadium again. And then, of course, the reduced concession stand prices. I think a lot of fans have been happy to see that kind of fan-friendly step from the new athletic director, Josh Brooks. But beyond that, John, having been a part of the athletic board meeting recently, what was your kind of takeaway with kind of where things stand at UGA right now and kind of the overall mood around the athletic department?
Well, there's so much to be excited about, and there's so much positive activity happening, considering the circumstances. I mean, the job that Ryan Nesbitt, the chief financial officer for the athletic board, the job that they've done, the job of the fans and their dedication to this athletic department. I mean, originally, when COVID first, the pandemic is happening, and you're looking at numbers, and you're going, how do we make ends meet? And without laying off a single employee, without furloughing a single employee, like 85% of the other schools did, Georgia didn't. And they were able to do it because of a tightening of the belt and the fan support, I think, are the two primary factors. Obviously, the SEC was able to step in and try to subsidize each program across the board. But just to see the management and the forethought that has gone into place. I mean, and quite honestly, when you first sit in these meetings and you're saying, we've got these reserve funds that at one time athletic director Greg McGarity was getting some criticism for, this rainy day fund. You're thinking, how rainy can it get? And boy, did we see how rainy it could get. And these other programs weren't able to respond and react the way that Georgia did, just because of the forethought that went in place. for the unforeseen. Nobody could see this pandemic coming, but Georgia was much more prepared for it than pretty much any other school in the country. And I think that's why coming out of the pandemic and as things start to really open back up, we're looking at a brand new facility that's almost fully funded and a stadium that has seen recent renovations that is going to continue to be revitalized. And there's just so much to be excited about as compared to, everybody's still white-knuckling and saying, how are we going to rebuild from all the things that we've lost over this year? That's not where Georgia's at. So kudos to those that put us in this position to see the positives as compared to trying to figure out how to dig back out of this hole.
Yeah, John, I think that's really well said. I really appreciate you being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia today. It's always great to get your insight. Enjoy your time in Athens today, and we will look forward to getting a chance to speak to you very soon here as well.
Always a good time. Sorry for being a little bit distracted.
No worries.
There's a lot going on here, so it's fun.
Enjoy it, John. Thanks for your time.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So interesting to get all that from John Stinchcomb, a guy who's on the athletic board, not just giving you insight on what the meeting was about, but actually telling you that first-person perspective from having been one of the deliberators in the meeting. So that's kind of a nice thing to be able to get from John Stinchcomb there. I want to talk more about what John had to say. First, though, let me give you a shout-out to my friends at secondchance.law. I love what they do because, I say this all the time, just kind of, I'm just a big believer, like my overarching view on life is that second chances, grace, generosity, these are good things. And I like to see second chances bestowed, and I love it when people take advantage of a second chance and do something to make their life better. It's one of the reasons why I love what secondchance.law does. This is a law firm, and they are an expert when it comes to a specific aspect of Georgia law, which now provides an opportunity for folks who maybe have some issue in their past. They just would love to kind of have to, they want a mulligan for that one thing, right? They want to kind of go back and do that thing differently. And that's what secondchance.law in some cases can give you a chance to do. And you already know this. That means the kind of jobs you can apply for, the kind of living opportunities you can enjoy, a lot of things made better if you can just get like this one thing taken care of. And obviously the law can be kind of a confusing thing. Secondchance.law has worked to make it easier to understand. By giving you a free online quiz when you answer these questions, it kind of helps you determine your eligibility. And if you are ineligible, then my friends at secondchance.law can kind of explain to you and coach you up on how you can become eligible. This is a really good thing. And one of the partners is, of course, Double Dog, two-time UGA grad, longtime listener of DawgNation Daily, former Redcoat. We love the Redcoats around here, so this is good stuff. It is my just sincere wish that anybody who feels like this company and the work they're doing when it comes to law can be a benefit to you, please take that step and find out exactly how true that is. Secondchance.law for more information. Secondchance.law, more information there. One more quick thing on Turnage, then I want to move on and do the SEC through here for a moment. So let's say that Turnage really is gone, right? Former Alabama signee, former top 100 recruit, big-time high school player in Oxford, Mississippi. This guy had a lot of choices coming out of high school. This is the kind of big-time player that somebody like me kind of likes being in the fold at a place like Georgia. But let's say that this just doesn't feel right to him, that the arrival of Darian Kendrick to go along with what's already here and the Ringos and the Kimbers and the Speeds, knowing that he's sat at Alabama and hadn't gotten a chance to play, that coming here, that this is going to be too much of a challenge for him. Let's say that he moves on and he really is done there at Georgia. Honestly, I'll show you this, if you don't mind. Let's show the image one more time of Evans out of Tulsa saying that he's been offered from the University of Georgia. If this is the way that Georgia goes, Caleb Evans there, if this is the way that Georgia goes, if Evans gets the scholarship that at one point in time had been thought to go to Turnage, honestly, I got no problem with that either. I mean, for a couple of reasons. As I said on Twitter last night, the last defensive back that Georgia brought in from Tulsa, J.R. Reed, turned out to be a pretty good one, right? He was an AP All-American in his senior year, his final year there at UGA. You can't do much better than that. So Georgia has clearly had some success when it comes to taking former Golden Hurricanes on the roster, so you kind of work out well there. Here's another thing, though, that will be an aspect of how the transfer portal is used going forward, and this is just a fact, that guys mature in college. I mean, think about even in your own life, what you were as a high school student, what you became as a college student. Many times people just kind of find themselves as a way in a way in college they were not able to do in high school. And that's just kind of part of what goes on. And there's going to be some maturity and growth for like that group of 5 level player that maybe wasn't apparent when he was coming out of high school, that becomes more apparent when he's been doing some big things. I mean, the AAC is not a weak conference. There's some good competition week in, week out in that league, the American Athletic Conference. You know, if Evans has demonstrated in that league that he's capable of being, you know, a player here at Georgia, there will be some examples of this where guys do get a chance to move up from the group of 5 level to the big Power 5, you know, SEC level at a place like Georgia. That is going to be, in some ways, how this transfer portal gets used. So if Turnage is out and Evans is in, the fact that Evans kind of comes with a slightly lower profile in this particular case doesn't really scare me off at all, just given the fact that we're going to see some of these guys get a chance to move up the ranks using the transfer portal to their advantage in that way. A couple of other recruiting stories that it was interesting. Walter Nolan, 5-star defensive lineman we've talked about before. Nolan giving you what I thought was a very surprising tweet over the weekend, but the possibility that his recruitment could be coming to an end. Let me show you this, and I'll kind of give you a response to it. Nolan saying on Twitter that he wants to announce that he's going to be shutting down his recruitment and making a decision. With all due respect to Nolan, who obviously meant this when he wrote it, sometimes I sort of have a hard time believing that, you know, if you're going to go back and listen to the interview that Nolan gave Jeff Sintel a few weeks ago when he was in Atlanta for a recruiting event, this is a guy who was very interested in his process at the time and seemed very content to allow all of that to play out over the course of months. You know, the idea that he is now ready to shut all this down, even if that's what he tweets, I guess I'm a little skeptical that it's really going to quite play out that way. Many Florida fans took this as really good news because the tweet by Nolan after having visited Florida you'd be left to believe, well, gosh, I guess Florida must have really rolled out the red carpet for him if that's what he's doing. I mean, the fact of the matter is Florida's just not a good enough recruiting program to get a guy like Walter Nolan to truly shut down his recruitment. And, you know, you're going to get some of this kind of stuff from time to time where, you know, guys are really excited after having taken a visit. But my guess is that the Nolan thing probably ends up being a little different than that tweet suggests it's going to be. Not that I don't take his word seriously. I just think that when you look at the preponderance of information that's been out there regarding Nolan, the idea that all of this is going to come to an end right now, I have a hard time believing that. And as I said before, I have zero respect for Dan Mullen as a recruiter. If there was a coach that could get a guy like Nolan to shut down his recruitment, I simply don't believe Dan Mullen would be that guy. But I've been wrong before, so we will see how that goes. One more thing I want to get to you here, and you know, we say this from time to time, that as exciting as it is to know that Georgia has a dead period lifted and able to start taking and hosting visitors again, you know, the other schools get a chance to do the same thing. And, you know, we talked about Antwi and Delp, Kojo Antwi and Oscar Delp being in Alabama recently, and all the other recruiting targets from Georgia that have been kind of all over the place. There was also a couple of UGA commits who were in College Station this weekend. Deion Bowie was there. Obviously, Bowie's got a relationship with Nick Williams. And Bear Alexander on Twitter showing off himself in that Texas A&M maroon there as well. And this is when we go back with Jeff Sintel. In fact, we'll show this tweet to you on the screen here. This is something we talked about with Jeff Sintel on Friday. I'm going to keep saying over and over again. It's not that I'm not of the belief that Bear Alexander won't eventually be in Georgia's 2022 class. I have every reason to believe that he will. But I take this recruiting battle pretty seriously. I mean, you know, and we can show the Bear tweet if you want to. I take this pretty seriously that the Aggies, I think, are a factor and a little bit of a, there you see Bear right there wearing the maroon jersey. He says, I came from nothing. I didn't have anybody, no other way to go about it, no other mindset I'd rather have than this one. So he's obviously having a good time and feeling, you know, pretty excited about all of this. And so this is when you got to watch closely, right? I mean, College Station is close to his hometown. He can go there a good bit. My guess is he will travel there a good bit. When it's all said and done, do I think that Georgia wins this recruiting battle? I guess I probably think that it will. But do I expect to see he and maybe even Bowie as well showing up at College Station from time to time a little bit more? Yeah, that there's certainly a chance of that with the presence of Nick Williams. The fact that A&M's a pretty good recruiting school right now anyway, one of the best in the SEC West at the current moment. My guess is that Georgia fans will be hearing the name Texas A&M in its own recruiting battle, in their school's own recruiting battles for some time to come here. So do with that what you will, but Bear Alexander apparently having a good time in College Station over the weekend will make that your SEC through. Let me also give a quick shout out here to Lou Harris-Stamper, the UGA softball coach. The team's run in Oklahoma City for the Women's College World Series did come to an end, but after that was over with, Harris-Stamper announced her retirement. What a way to go out there by getting your team to the Women's College World Series. Great run there, coming to an end here this weekend, and a career now coming to an end. Interesting to see where Georgia goes with this. Every reason to believe this will be one of the most coveted job openings in that sport, just given the hotbed that is the SEC, the talent that exists here in the state of Georgia. It's one of the things I've learned now that I've got kids who are old enough to be at ballparks and we're traveling around the state, in our little area, neck of the woods there, just how big softball is in Georgia. That's not one of those things I was too aware of before I had kids of my own, but boy, you really see that on full display right now, and obviously UGA stands to benefit from all that interest in the sport here in this state, so this no doubt will be a hot job opening that a lot of folks will have some interest in, and so congratulations to Lou Harris-Stamper on a terrific career culminating with a trip to the Women's College World Series, and we wish her well in this next phase of her life's journey. And as we wrap up on this show here today, we like to do so in style. Speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, we do our Gator Hater roll call and we give out a golden shoe winner. Today's golden shoe winner just a little bit different, though. This one cracked me up so much. Last week on the show, we were talking about the new football facility at Georgia, and I said before that I do like nice leather, that I like a nice, leather grain, whether it be in the seats of a car or office furniture or whatever else. You can just kind of rub your hand on it, kind of tell the difference on that. Well, Matt on Twitter was making some fun of that, kind of saying I'm a little bit like Martin Lawrence. Remember like the Bad Boys movies when Lawrence and Will Smith were kind of talking about that? I can't play the full video for you because Big Tech will censor us. But nonetheless, I showed off the photo here from Matt on Twitter saying that I'm like Martin Lawrence and the DawgNation audience is like Will Smith. That's really, really funny. Yeah, I like my nice leather, much like Martin Lawrence did in Bad Boys there. Hey, Gator Hater Countdown, 145 days from right now. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Hope you all have a great day. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. And, of course, we do this each and every day, and I certainly appreciate that. Glad to have you with us for it. Of course, R.S. Andrews is the one to turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can find them online today. They will take care of it. They'll get your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. That is a really good thing. So make sure you check them out here today. Let me get a few of your comments, and we will kind of roll on here on a Monday. Hope all of you are doing well. A little bit of a rainy Monday. But nonetheless, hope you're having a good time. All right, on Facebook here for a moment. Let's see what folks are talking about. Matt Rukavina says he thinks that kids should have the option if their coach leaves when it comes to transferring, but he says too many kids quit in the face of adversity. And I do think that's a real problem. And I know I sound like, what was it Terrence Edwards said on the show the other day? I sort of sound like the old man on the porch when I talk that way. But the truth is that we have set up a system in college football now that runs totally at odds to the advice that you would give your own children or your parents would have given to you if you ever found yourself in a similar situation. I mean, the fact of the matter is that there's a certain counterintuitive nature to life that you'll actually get more happiness leaning into your responsibilities than you will leaning into your rights. I know that sounds weird, and I'm not anti-freedom, but fulfilling your obligations will, in many cases, just make you happier than, sometimes, chasing every single individual freedom that you have. And so for the players who stick around and say, hey, I've got an obligation to make good on my role here with this team, to fight and work and claw and scratch my way to the top. Honestly, I'd love to see kind of a case study side by side of the players who do some version of that versus the players who just look to leap into the transfer portal the moment something bad happens. Listen, Georgia benefits on both sides of this, right? I mean, Georgia takes some of those players who obviously have unhappily left their other schools. I'm not naive to that fact, but just for the big picture of college football, I do think it'd be really interesting to study guys who choose to stick it out and stay, guys who choose to transfer at a moment's notice, and over the course of years, which group of guys produces the happiest players. I think that's a study worth paying attention to. Randy Hall says that this is going to be another soap opera as the world turnage. That's very funny. Very funny. Bill Kelly says these are kids who are being highly entertained and offer the world. They goof sometimes. And Bill's 100% right about that. You know, you have to have somebody in your life who tells you to be careful when somebody else is telling you 100% of what you want to hear. I say this all the time. Anytime somebody's telling you 100% of what you want to hear, there's a 100% chance they are lying about something, because life is never 100% what you want it to be. There's always a hard part to everything. And when someone's trying to conceal the hard part to you, then they're trying to manipulate your emotions. And for every recruit that goes through all of this, for every player who goes through the recruiting process now as a part of the transfer portal, I hope they have someone in their life telling them, be careful with these people who are promising you the world. And, you know, listen, you know, I'm sure when Georgia's doing its recruiting, I'm sure they're painting their program, the opportunity the player has, in the best possible light. Georgia would be foolish not to, right? That's all part of the sales process and all of this. But understanding that you are being sold, I think, is an important thing for these players too. I think that's absolutely the case. Phil Rogers says that Georgia needs Florida State and Miami to get good in football again to take some players away from Florida. I think you're actually seeing some of that happening. First of all, Miami's been pretty good at recruiting now for the last couple of years. It seems like Norvell is kind of getting something going at Florida State there too. And I agree with your overall point that as Seminoles, Hurricanes get better, I think it makes things a little harder for Florida. I think you're right about that. Let me give you a game to watch for pretty early in the season. Think about, I think it's week 1. Am I right about this? Either week 1 or week 2. Maybe week 1. I think it is week 1. Florida State plays Notre Dame. Keep your eye on that game right there. Notre Dame's a fairly big favorite, but, you know, Irish, I mean, they're against elite competition, you know, highly rated recruits, things like that. Notre Dame has a tendency to look like Notre Dame, and that's not always a good thing. I think there's a sneaky upset opportunity for Florida State there in that game. Sneaky upset opportunity. And I think that upset could be a little bit of an announcement that Florida State, not back the way they were in the 90s, I'm not saying that, but a little bit more of a force to be reckoned with in the state of Florida than they've been before. I think that's a very early season game that's probably worth watching. Bill Kelly says he could see Florida State challenging Clemson a bit too. Interesting comparison there in the ACC Atlantic. Brian Jones says, is Nolan scheduled to come to UGA? Yeah, I do believe that the industry has him visiting Georgia here in the very near future, I believe. Or in Chile. And listen, I think this is just really honest, and I'm glad to hear, you know, some Georgia fans willing to be this honest. When it comes to the SEC championship, obviously hoping that Georgia gets there, Oren says, I want to beat Alabama. It's not the same thing if you only beat Texas A&M. And I think that, to a degree, that Oren is bringing up a really good point. And that's not, by the way, the same thing as saying the SEC championship would be diminished if Alabama doesn't get there. That's not the same thing as saying that. But there is a level of prestige that exists for beating Alabama that's in addition to whatever championship you win. And frankly, I think this is one of the things that's really important for, you know, like there's a natural element of spin involved in everybody's argument. And, you know, there's a lot of Alabama fans that want to talk about what Georgia hasn't done in comparison to Alabama, and I totally get where all that comes from. But like one of the elements of spin that Georgia does need to use which is that, hey, maybe Georgia could have beaten Alabama in the 2017 SEC championship game, but Alabama didn't qualify for the game. That maybe Georgia could have beaten Alabama in the 2019 SEC championship game, but Alabama didn't qualify to be there. That part of Georgia's issue with not getting over the hump versus Alabama in an SEC championship game is the 3 times that Kirby Smart's been there, Alabama's only been in the game one of those 3 times. That Alabama has a habit of not making the SEC championship game. Sometimes we don't quite notice that as well as we possibly could. So, you know, when you're having that argument with an Alabama fan about, you know, what your program is in comparison to his program, you know, keep that in mind that some of Georgia's inability to beat Alabama in an SEC championship is the fact that Alabama just nowhere to be found in some of these games. So, but I understand the point that Oren is making here. And I guess the analogy that I've used about this before is there was a time in the early 90s that Mike Tyson was not the heavyweight champion of the world, but beating Tyson would have been a bigger deal than beating whoever was the heavyweight champion of the world, Michael Moore, Buster Douglas, or maybe even for a time Evander Holyfield, that beating Tyson would have been a bigger deal than beating the actual champ. And I think that Alabama has some of that Tyson baddest man in the world type prestige to it, that there is something about beating Alabama that's kind of separate and above just winning a championship, that Alabama kind of has its own level of prestige, that knocking off the Crimson Tide would, in a way, I don't want to say it'd be its own trophy, but there's certainly a level of prestige that would be commensurate with that would be similar to winning a trophy. All right, let me do YouTube for a minute. I'll come back to Facebook, get some more comments here in a little bit after that. All right, let's see what else is going on. Jermaine Jones says, it's just that Bama fans won't, I'm going to say be quiet. He said something else, which is his right to do so. Unless we beat them, no matter if we win the chip or not, they'll keep talking unless we beat them too. And Jermaine's right about that there would be certainly a sense of frustration that if Georgia were to win a championship, avoid Alabama in the process, somehow a lot of Alabama fans would still feel empowered to say whatever it is they wanted to say. I think that Jermaine brings up a fair point on that. Let's see what else. HR Picking Stuff says, I think UGA can beat Vandy. I'm going to bet that game big. That's a big, bold claim there, HR. I appreciate that. Paula Clark, good to see you checking in. Brandon Griffin says, new facilities, name, image, likeness advantages for UGA. Athens voted best college town in the South, second in the country. All the pieces are coming together for a UGA dynasty for the next decade. And I do believe this is true. And this is one of those things that sounds like overly conspiratorial if you're not a Georgia fan, but if you want to go back to when the SEC was first kind of getting formed the way we kind of understand it now in kind of modern times, like talk about like the 1960s when Bear Bryant was at Alabama, there wasn't much difference in the various southern states, right? Population was similar. Atlanta from a population standpoint wasn't much different than Birmingham. You had a lot of these, Memphis kind of the similar size. You had a lot of these southern cities that were of similar size, the states themselves kind of similar population. Well, over the course of the next few decades, there's a huge change in the population of Georgia. Frankly, there's also a pretty big change in the population of Florida as well. But, from a population standpoint, Georgia grows rapidly. And all of a sudden, Birmingham doesn't feel like the nucleus, the center of the SEC as much anymore. The league office is there, and you still have a lot of SEC baseball tournament, things like that are there. But it became ridiculous to keep the SEC championship football game in Birmingham because while it may be the geographic center, it is not the nucleus anymore. That clearly was more Atlanta, which had become a major city, and there's all kinds of financial resources available in the state of Georgia that don't exist in the other southern states. And frankly, for a long time, the University of Georgia just didn't take full advantage of that. Being the SEC school that was the closest to a major media market, this was just not something that Georgia exploited very well. If anything, I would say that Florida, the University of Florida probably exploited its own resources down there in the Sunshine State as that state's pop was really growing. But Georgia kind of didn't do the same thing for whatever reason. You can have your own opinion as to why that was. But for a long time, Georgia was just not swinging every club in its bag, it seemed like, when it came to really, being as big as it could. Well, the one thing you got to say under Kirby Smart is all of that has changed. All of a sudden, Kirby Smart's using everything to his advantage. And, I do think there's some anxiety about that. If you're an SEC program that kind of has had it easy because you're living off a foundation that you built for yourself in the 1960s when the overall landscape of the South looked completely different, then all of a sudden in the new world, your spot isn't quite as protected as maybe it once was. And that's what I would say that Smart is doing at the moment. He's leaning on these, business relationships, on these, in some cases even political relationships. And, he's leaning on the finances, the resources. He's using everything to his advantage. And honestly, if Georgia doesn't become what Brandon just described, then something weird has happened. Something's wrong. Georgia has some built-in advantages that other SEC schools don't have. And, Georgia would be foolish not to use those. And if somehow it tries to use them and it doesn't succeed at the highest level, then that's a big failing, and it should be examined as to why that took place. And it's fair to ask why it hasn't happened before now, but ultimately that's all in the past. I think it's pretty clear that right now Georgia is content to use everything it has to be as good as it can possibly be. Foster Moss says, what do you think about Julio with the Titans? Here's the thing, Foster. So as an Atlanta sports fan, here's the thing that probably bothers me as much as the lack of championships that my teams have enjoyed. I saw the Braves win a World Series in 1995. I've seen the Falcons get close, but obviously there's no championships to speak of in Atlanta. And that's a sad thing for a fan. But the thing that probably makes me even more sad than that is the ways in which the great players that have come through Atlanta kind of have their careers end in Atlanta in really unfortunate ways, right? I mean, think about Dominique Wilkins getting traded back in the 90s in the midst of what was a good season. You bring in Danny Manning as his replacement, and it's just a weird trade, right? I mean, this is a Hall of Fame basketball player, the face of the Hawks franchise for their time in Atlanta here, and his career in Atlanta just comes to an end in a very weird way. Now, all is forgiven. Neek's a fixture in this city. You see him all the time around here, but his career in Atlanta ends in a weird way. Think about Tom Glavine, who was on the mound when the Braves won the World Series in 1995. Through contract dispute and taking more money, ends up going to play for the hated Mets, and that's kind of a weird addendum to his career. After what had happened for him in a Braves uniform, he ends up playing for the Mets for like a little bit more money. And there are other examples that you kind of got to go through and mention. Even David Justice, who hit the home run to win the World Series in '95, the way that he gets traded out of town, and obviously what happened with Michael Vick, and kind of on and on you could go with these guys that Atlantans have loved rooting for, and yet their careers in Atlanta kind of come to an end in fairly unfortunate ways. And the fact that Julio Jones had to be traded for a second-round pick just so Atlanta would have enough salary cap space to sign their draft picks, that is an organizational failing. And listen, they can do all the the happy, feel-good, hey, walk down memory lanes regarding Julio's time in Atlanta. That does not change the fact that Julio is in Nashville now because of the ineptitude of the Falcons organization over the course of the last few years that allowed Atlanta to get into this kind of salary cap situation. So I wish him well. I think he'll do well there. I think that's an organization that seems fairly well set up for success. Looks like Vrabel's doing a pretty good job as the head coach there. There's a lot of offensive weapons, a lot of former SEC offensive weapons in Nashville. So I'm not, going to cheer against Julio necessarily there in Nashville. I guess I wish him well. But this is a huge failing of the Falcons organization to allow this to come to this. And, listen, you can make a case that, for Julio, for the money he was making, maybe he should have been healthier and more available to Atlanta. Maybe he could have been a little bit more of a vocal leader in pushing the organization in the direction that he thought it should go. He's been kind of content to just sort of get along and go along with a lot of stuff around here. So you can say all that if you want to. But there's no doubt in my mind that this is just an ugly black eye on the Falcons organization, that they had to trade Julio in this manner and essentially got the same return for him that they got from Mohamed Sanu a couple of years ago. That's just embarrassing. Let's see what else. Let me go back over to Facebook for a moment, and I'll come back over to YouTube before we leave. Steve Highland says, how about the Dogs with a Fab Five? Eugene needs to get that done. That sounds fun. I like the idea of that. Miriam Martin Corbin says, I thought about you while I was at Jekyll Island. Beautiful place. She says, didn't you say you used to stay there for a game, or was it St. Simon's? Yeah, St. Simon's I like to be at. Jekyll Island, as the great Larry Munson once said, all those places where those dog people have those condominiums. But Jekyll Island's a beautiful place. St. Simon's is gorgeous there as well. I love that whole area up and down the Georgia coast, just there in North Florida there as well. That Golden Isles area is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Bill Sanders says, like it or not, Alabama is the measuring stick, not just in the SEC, but in all of college football right now. And I believe that's probably true. Terry Rigdon says, as far as Julio goes, didn't like the way he left Atlanta. I think he could have done it a lot differently. Yeah, the whole thing was just kind of weird. Marcinio Askew says, how about the GOAT Simone Biles last night? So I didn't see this, but I heard something great happen, but I didn't see what it was. There was a lot of sports on, right? The U.S. men's national team in soccer beats Mexico. They kind of have a little bit of a wild melee with all of that. Obviously, the baseball stuff this weekend was crazy. I know a lot of Gator haters enjoyed seeing Florida absolutely just get manhandled by South Alabama. I mean, absolute manhandling by the Jaguars of USA. And then you have the Tennessee walk-off. There's a bunch of sports this weekend. I watched the Hawks yesterday. I mean, I know it got tense late, but how about going into Philadelphia, game one, scoring 74 first-half points against the number 2 defense in the league? What an amazing thing that was. Phil Rogers says when Hank Aaron was good, Braves either had pitching and no hitting or hitting and no pitching. And I think that's kind of interesting. The other thing, Phil, that I've never seen really any footage of whatsoever, maybe it's there, I just haven't found it, is like the Braves who won their first division in Atlanta in 1969. What would that been? 4th year in Atlanta, I guess. Won the division in 69. It was the first year of divisional play. They lost in the NLCS to the Miracle Mets, the famous 69 Mets World Series champion, that Tom Seaver and everything else with that team. But the 69 Braves had cool uniforms, really, really sharp uniforms. But I haven't seen a lot of footage from Aaron in the playoffs with the Braves in 69. I'd like to go back and see if I could find some footage of that. Keith Foltz says the Florida baseball game was hilarious. Yeah, I know a lot of Georgia fans enjoyed that. I guess the Florida coach is also, it's either he is leaving or might be leaving for LSU. Can you imagine? I mean, this is weird for both sides, right? It's like there was like a local media guy for Florida who absolutely ripped the Gators. Like there was no fans in the stands hardly. They were just getting, completely blasted by South Alabama. I guess this was a down year for Florida baseball. They're used to being really good, so maybe they just weren't into this team this year. But there was a lot of criticism of Florida for kind of what people said essentially quitting, in that game against South Alabama. And now, if I'm reading the reports correctly, this coach on his way to LSU, LSU fans love their baseball. How do you feel about bringing a guy that just, got run-ruled by South Alabama? That's kind of crazy. Beggin Megan says, I'm doing my part down here in Gainesville. Well, Megan, we appreciate you being here. And I'm glad we can keep you company down there in enemy territory. So thanks for being part of the show. Nature Gator says that UGA softball I guess I must have said that Florida baseball got manhandled. Nature Gator said UGA softball got woman handled by Oklahoma. Yeah, Oklahoma. That's a tough team for sure. Tough team. Paula Clark says, telling everybody he was leaving on a podcast, not professional. I think Paula's referencing Julio Jones. It's important to note, and this matters to me, Julio did not know he was on air when he said that. So I think that, at least that's the understanding that I have. So that's the other weird part about this is that Shannon Sharp, who does not always have the greatest reputation, Shannon Sharp, apparently, according to some, I guess according to Julio himself, put Julio on air without Julio's knowledge, and that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. So I don't blame Julio for the "I'm out of here" comment as much, because listen, what you say privately, people, are going to say things privately, but I think that he was thinking he was saying something privately that was made into something public without him knowing. All right, a couple more, and then we are going to go. Connor Graham says Karis Jackson's our least talked about receiver. He was our top pass catcher last year. Why do we forget about Karis? I think Connor's right. We talked about Karis on the show, I think it was 2 Fridays ago. This is a guy who, was big for Georgia on third down a year ago. This was a guy who, had more than 100 yards receiving against both Auburn and Tennessee. Those were big games at that time of the year. And as a polished weapon this year, a little bit less flashy than some of the other receivers we might talk about, but as a polished weapon, that's somebody that could do some nice things for Georgia here this year. Thomas Tyson says he thinks the Hawks can win against the Sixers. I think that as well. Based on what you saw yesterday, I think so too. Now, I do think that Philadelphia is going to be tough in the series, and right now, Embiid looks pretty healthy, to be honest with you. But, Atlanta is just, this is a very impressive run 5 wins and 6 tries thus far in the playoffs. This is a very impressive run for this Hawks team right now. Aaron Mitchum asked, what's the status on Jermaine Burton? Yeah, I think that this is one of those things that probably got misconstrued a little bit, but while the Burton injury was scary when it happened because, I think he had to be carted off the field, the end result was kind of a false alarm, though. I mean, I think that every indication is that Jermaine Burton is healthy and ready to go for this upcoming summer heading into the fall. I do not believe that Burton is injured at all right now. It was an injury that, I think it was a bone bruise or something along those lines. And sometimes they can look really, really serious because, you see the guy go down and it kind of reminds you of the other kinds of knee injuries. But as it turns out, the case with Burton, my understanding is it was a false alarm. Foster Moss says, do you think that Mike Leach pulls off an upset or two? I guess I probably don't, but to be fair, there are a lot of other people who think he will. There are a lot of people out there who expect Leach to have a big year 2 bounce for Mississippi State. So fair and balanced here, I have to admit that there's a lot of analytics, betting type chatter about Leach and Mississippi State right now. I can't deny that, even though I'm not one who personally believes it. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Brian Whitehead, unhappy with Julio being a little bit of a distraction. Yeah, I mean, there are probably ways he could have handled his situation differently. Even if you don't blame him for what happened on the Fox program, there may be some things he could have done differently. Daniel Aldrich, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Good to see Tennille Calvino back. Feels like we haven't seen Tennille in a while. Glad to have her back here as well. All right. Thanks for being here for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Check them out online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Also, do not forget ajc.com for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Great reporting from Philadelphia yesterday, the side of the Hawks game 1 win against Philadelphia. That was great to see. Also, some big news as well. How about Jeff Bezos apparently going to space? So another rich guy heading towards the to the outer space world. That's kind of interesting to see. Looks like most Atlanta students are going to be returning to in-person instruction next year. That sounds like a good thing. And by the way, very quietly, good weekend for the Braves here too against LA. Right after a lot that's been going on there. So some kind of nice stuff there related to all of that. But, of course, the Julio Jones trade, the Hawks win in Philadelphia, that dominates the sports coverage in the AJC today. So Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com. Make sure you check that out. We certainly appreciate all of you being here for R.S. Andrews Cool Down. As I said before, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Find them online at rsandrews.com. See you back here tomorrow, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody.